for drawing.
Yes. That's okay. Like I said, we're all figuring it out.
Yeah.
Oh,
can you tell us who you are?
Oh, yes. I am Monica Gallagher, and I do the comic Assassin Roommate, which is on Webtoons, as well as the webcomic Bonnie and Clyde, which I actually just restarted on my website. I forgot to mention that. But I've done a bunch of mini comics and books over the years. But yeah, right now it's mainly Assassin Roommate.
Nice. So we had started to talk about your process with the iPad, being you started there first and then you moved on to inking. Did you want to tell us about that?
Yes. Well, yeah, it's kind of funny because a couple years ago, I decided I wanted to be a lot more portable with my work situation. So I would bring a scanner everywhere, like a scanner and a pad of paper everywhere I went. So I would do all my pencils by hand and then ink by hand and then scan them like wherever I was, which was funny, but not the best. So now that I have an iPad, I can do all my layouts, which is like all the messy thumbnail sketches, and the pencil, like the better pencils on the iPad, and then I print that onto Bristol board and then ink over that.
So this might be a dumb question, but so do you have like a giant iPad, or do you do it small and then stretch it out, or how does that work?
Yeah, I just have a regular size iPad. I'm looking, I don't know where it is. It's somewhere over there. It's just it's a regular little one. I think it's like 6x9. But what I did was I saved an 11x17 like document size. So that's what I use every time. So it's nice because you can just zoom in and zoom out and move around, and it doesn't have to be huge. Yeah.
Do you have to use like special pens or different types of pens, or can you just go in and kind of change what you're doing with just any stylus?
Yeah, well, I had to get the Apple Pencil. I started off with a Wacom stylus, and it did not work at all, and that was really frustrating. So I don't know if Apple does that on purpose, but at least for the iPad, like the Apple Pencil is kind of necessary. And then you can like, select whatever brushes you want and stuff. But I haven't found one that really rivals inking by hand yet. I know there's tons of other comics creators who do it by hand that it's just gorgeous, like Becky Cloonan and Annie Wu. Like they've all found like they've like mastered the digital inking, but I haven't yet.
It's funny because every artist I've talked to has gone digital, but inking they still have to do by hand. They still like that.
Really?
Yeah. Which I thought was interesting because I don't know anything about the art. So.
Well, I think it's very meditative. Like it's very satisfying to do it by hand. Yeah.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you some questions that my customers have for you.
Ooh, yes.
What is your favorite breakfast?
I think I'm going to have to go old school and say pancakes. Pancakes are, I usually pick those hands down.
All right. I'm going to look and see if I have any other ones as I ask you this other one. In your opinion, what book goes under the people's radar the most?
That's a really good question. I don't know, because I feel like I read a lot of stuff that a lot of other people read, but I also read a lot of my friends' stuff. Yeah, I'm not sure, because they're all doing pretty well. I can't think. The only ones I can think of are like super popular.
What would you say to someone that comes to you and talks about boobage being very inspiring to them? They feel very represented. They feel seen. How do you take that? How do you take that kind of compliment? How do you react to that?
Well, that's the best. I mean, like that's kind of the reason why you create stories, I think, is that hopefully someone, you reach them and they identify with it. So it's always huge if I can. I mean, I get a lot of comments specifically about boobage where people either super identify with it or they have the opposite experience, but they still find something in it that's relatable, which is, I think that's the best outcome. It doesn't have to be exactly your story, but if you can identify with it, and I think anything autobiographical is a huge help with that. People tend to identify with it automatically a lot more.
Yeah, see, I have the opposite, but I still love that it exists out there.
Yeah, Exactly.
So what would you say to, little girl comes up and says, this is the greatest thing ever. I want to do what you do.
I would say, yeah, like the number one advice that I got that I loved that was true was don't stop. Because there are always going to be people who tell you to stop. And there's always going to be situations where you get down on yourself and you compare yourself to other people, which is natural, but you can never compare yourself to anyone else because you're always going to be you. Yeah. So, and a lot of people get frustrated and quit. And I would say, if you really love it, just don't stop. Just keep doing it.
Is there any like characters that you want to work on that you're like, I give me this thing and I want to work on it?
There are so many, but I had this like idea. I had like I would love, I mean, honestly, there's like tons of characters I would love to work on. Some of them are intimidating because they have such a huge backstory. I mean, you obviously know it's like all the crazy like spin-offs and all that would be intimidating. But when people were rebooting DC Comics characters, there was something about Dolphin, and I really wanted to work on Dolphin. I thought I had an idea on how to reboot her in like a cool way.
Did you ever go for it and like call them and say, hey, I have a dolphin?
I pitched it to a friend of mine who worked for DC at the time, but it didn't go anywhere. So maybe in a few years I'll try again. So
what would you do if like Richard or Wendy said draw would that be too much? Would you go for it, or would you go, oh, that's too?
I mean, it would be a dream come true, but I don't know what I would bring to the table. Like they're already so good. I mean, and they do have a lot of artists that work for them as well that are already like just solid. So yeah, I mean, I would if there was like an ElfQuest anthology, maybe we should do that. Then that would 100%.
Oh, pennies, listen to us.
Yeah. I've actually met them. I met them for the first time at Emerald City a few years ago.
Me too.
Yeah.
So my everyone teases me because I hate lines. I cannot handle lines, and I don't like crowds, and I'm not a big fan of Emerald City because it's so big. Yeah. But I stood in line to see the pennies. Like they're one of the only people I've ever stood in line for because I was like, it's ElfQuest. I have to go stand in line. So yeah, that was my Amethyst and ElfQuest were my first two comics.
Oh, really? Awesome.
I have such a love for ElfQuest.
Who's your, do you have a favorite elf? Or a favorite character?
I think probably Strongbow. That's always been my...
Hey, Strongbow. He's like the dark horse.
Yeah. Strong, silent, just gets the job done, silently judges. That's so true. Opposite of me.
He's very dependable, yeah.
Sorry, little sidetracking. So are there any books right now that you're working on? Or that you're reading?
Oh, that I'm reading? Yeah, I've been catching up with, because I'm terrible. A bunch of comics people are like this too. I feel like we love reading each other's stuff, but then at the same time, it's I don't know, we don't want to get like too invested because then we stop doing our own stuff and we just want to read other people's stuff. I really like, on Webtoon, I really love Lore Olympus, which is just, it's gorgeous and it's a beautiful way of storytelling. My friend Danielle Corsetto, she and I worked together on a sex ed web comic that was on Webtoon called Boo It's Sex. That's actually still up for reading, but she and I stopped that last year. But she has a new comic coming out, I think at the end of this week, which is going to be huge. So I'm definitely excited about that.
Perhaps you could email me that, and I can put it up on
yeah. Yeah, it's going to be online for a while, but I know she definitely eventually wants to collect it into books, and it's going to be gorgeous because it's Danielle. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of series that I just like kind of like tap into and read everything and then tap out. Like a few years ago, I had to finally read the end of Strangers in Paradise, and I was so upset. I didn't want to do it.
I feel that. That. I read them. It's so funny. You and I have the exact same taste in comics. I read Strangers in Paradise as it was coming out.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was every 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Monthly. It was every 6 weeks. And it was painful. Very painful. But I reread it about once a year. So
good. And it's so good the whole way through. Yeah. It's solid.
I lost you. Okay. It's so good. The what? I lost you for a second.
Sorry, I know. I lost you for a second. It's just solid, like the whole way through. It's just, yeah.
Have you read the new one or?
I read the 5 years one, and I wasn't sure. Is that a? I'm not sure if that's the new one or if that was something else.
No, they had
action or
yeah,
5 years or something that was called 5 years.
I think 5 years was the one that had everybody in it, and then he had the Strangers in Paradise one.
Okay,
I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for that one to be more collected because I'm not going to torture myself again.
Yeah.
I learned that lesson 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So you seem to, do you have a preference with webcomics versus the written, like, paper version?
I'm selfish and I want both. Like, I want to be able, because the beauty of webcomics is that we've reached a much broader audience once they started putting on, like Webtoons is great because it's formatted really well for the phone. And I found a lot more women my age and older were reading it that way. I never had, like, most of my fans were usually younger or people who already read print comics. But the fact that I was reaching that, like, golden audience of, like, women who weren't reading comics to begin with is fantastic. That's a benefit. But I love holding a book. Like, I always want the book.
How do you think, I mean, speaking of webcomics and paper comics and things like that, how do you think the industry has changed over the course of the last decade or so?
I think they're still figuring out what's going on. I think because a lot of fans still want books, but I don't know if floppies will be around forever because I feel like a lot of people wait for the trade. And I mean, you would know more about that. So I think that has been kind of slowly dying out, maybe. The collector's aspect of the floppies. But I know people still really love print. It's nice to see, I don't know, it's kind of like a two-edged sword. Like, I like seeing more comics available online, but then I like the comic book store being a community center for people to come and, like, chat about comics. And that doesn't exist online as much as, people want to pretend it does. It doesn't.
Not in the same way, no.
No. Like, you can, and I love that, like, there are tons of people who still have, like, comic book clubs and things like that, which is really important. Yeah. So I'm not sure how it's going to evolve, but I hope it incorporates both. Like, I don't want to lose that community. Yeah.
What about as far as, getting into the industry? How has it changed, do you think?
I think it's easier, a lot easier than when I was, I mean, I kind of came in, I'm, like, a little bit older than the web comics, like, boom. Like, early 2000s. So when I was doing web comics, it was like 2 or 3 years before they kind of took off. And then it was easy to get, like, views because there weren't many people doing web comics. But at the same time now with Kickstarter and with the ability to put your own stuff online, publishers are, like, looking, like, they can see, they're always looking for talent and it's obvious. Whereas before, I think they were very closed off and you had to, like, know somebody who knew somebody to talk to them.
Do you feel like you can get into, like, Marvel, DC, and that kind of stuff easier now than when you first started?
I don't know.
Different? I don't know anything about that process, so.
I don't either, really. I mean, because, like, I did work with Vertigo, but that was because I had a friend who worked there. I think a lot of it still is who you know, and that's another benefit of conventions in general is I've gotten so many jobs just from meeting other comics people and talking to them. So that community definitely helps because we all recommend each other for certain gigs. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, it's probably definitely easier now because I know a lot more people than when I started. Yeah.
So how do you feel about conventions? Do you love them? Do you hate them?
I love them. They're, like, some of them are like a marathon and we all love to complain about them. Like, some of the 4-day shows or 5-day shows are ridiculous.
I'm starting to be like, so Emerald City Comic Con month, and it's getting crazy.
Yeah, and it's like, do you really want to see, like, a shell of a human at the end of the last day? Do you really want to talk to them about their comics? But that's the only time I get to see all of my comics friends in person, chat with them and catch up and compare notes. So yeah, I really love it. And then, obviously, like, see any fans too. We're all very, like, in our own little bubble, so it's nice. It's like, oh, there's actually people reading the stuff that I put out all the time.
I put a lot of work into this. Yay, people like it. Is there any particular part of the process that you love more than other parts, or any parts that are just like this is a slog?
Yeah. I mean, I learned early on that if I was really struggling with drawing like a specific page or a specific scene, then I had to change it, because no one's going to want to read it if they could tell I was like really hating it, like when I was doing it. But I still, like, coloring is really hard for me. That's super time consuming. So I have someone who flats my colors for me, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
All
What
of
does that mean?
I love to. So coloring usually is like in two sections. So there's flat colors with absolutely no shading.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like someone coming in and just literally like filling in colors
Mm.
for every spot. And then you have like regular colorists, I guess, or all around colorists do that, but then also add shading, they add highlights, they add like all the different effects, like glows and all that stuff. So color flatting is like unfortunately it doesn't pay very well, and I feel like it's very time consuming, but it's really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people tend to hire out for that and then do their own shading on top of that, which is what I do.
Nice. Excellent.
Yeah.
So is there, I just totally lost my train of thought. I just totally forgot what I was going to ask you. Oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed.
Well, that was the part, that was the part I hated. I guess the part I love the most is, I mean, sometimes there's just pure joy, and like, very rarely it actually matches up what I see in my head with what I've drawn. Mm-hmm. When that happens, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you get this question a lot, but where do your ideas come from? What is your inspiration? Are you just walking down the street and like, hey, Derby girl, I'm going to do this. Hey.
Yeah, it's a combination of stuff. Like, my friends have made fun of me that I have like just a spinning wheel, and it's just like werewolves, derby, assassins. I just spin it every now and then and just pick the same thing. Most of it's honestly from life and experience and people I meet and friends of mine. And then kind of things that I haven't seen before that I want to see like done a different way. That's also like a big motivator. So yeah, it's kind of a combination of, I mean, I'm a huge mythology fan, so I'll like look there for inspiration forever. A really nice way too for anyone who worries about not coming up with ideas is if you ingest a lot of content from other sources, especially ones outside of like what you're used to, it will really inspire you. Mm-hmm. So if you like, say you're a science fiction writer and you only want to read science fiction, you only want to watch science fiction, if you watch a nature documentary, it will end up inspiring you in ways that you hadn't thought about and will actually help you come up with more ideas.
Giant jellyfish from outer space.
And to make it horrifying, yeah.
Yes. So what is your favorite of your work to draw? Like, what's your darling? What's the one that you love the most?
It's definitely Assassin Roommate. Yeah, that story is really like blown up from what I initially imagined in ways that it really delighted me. I didn't have any idea that it would like grow this much. So yeah.
How so?
Well, it started out, I was basically approached by an editor at Webtoons who wanted me to pitch a romance story. And I was like, well, I want to do a story about assassins. Can I just have it about assassins who make out? And he was like, sure. And then it just kind of, blossomed from there into all the characters became very different and had very interesting personalities and complicated plots that I didn't think about when I first started it. So, yeah.
Is there a time, like with your webcomics and stuff, that you go, okay, so we need to round the corner and we need to end this. We need to wrap this up. Like, is there a point that you do that, or?
Yeah, I'm really bad at that.
Pause and know you're going to come back to it.
Most of my things I pause, I feel like, because I don't want them to end. I did end, my very first webcomic was called Gods and Undergrads, and I did end that, I think around like maybe 2012 or so. Mm-hmm. And it ended very suddenly, and I was definitely done, but I guess that's still a pause because I would totally revisit that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's one of the nice things. I mean, it seems like with webcomics and stuff, you don't have the overhead or kind of some of the paper stuff you do. Do you find that is more or less scary? Like that you have to have so much work all the time, but you don't have to like worry about paper and where you're printing it and stuff like that. It seems like such a on point all the time kind of thing.
It's definitely, yeah, because I watched that documentary Stripped about the cartoonists, like the comic strip cartoonists back in the day, the syndicated ones. It was like Bill Watterson and Jim Davis and all those people, and it was really stressful because it was 7 days a week comics.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, they never got a break. It was just like just go, and I do feel like that sometimes, because I have 5 pages I do every week.
Mm-hmm.
But it's nice because it's a 6-month kind of gig. So you're responsible for that for 6 months. And then, you can have like a little bit of a breather before like the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also steady income, which is really rare in comics.
Mm-hmm. Is there any big difference between, or can you talk about the difference between doing the webcomics versus doing the DC books and things like that, maybe obviously you don't have as much control over, but your style and how you go about drawing them and things like that?
Yeah, I pretty much have complete freedom with my webcomics, so I'm spoiled. But it's also just me. Mm-hmm. For other stuff like for the Black Ghost, and when I worked just on like, tiny stories, but with like bigger publishers, it's like a whole team, so you only have to do your part. And then, other people make it great, or other people combine. It's much more collaborative, but also much more, you're just like a part of the machine, and, you just try not to mess up your part. Mm-hmm. But it's fun. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you find that you have a lot of say in what happens, or just do this thing and then that's it?
I think it depends your role. Because I've been a co-writer on some things, and I feel like you have more of a say as the writer than probably if I was the artist on it. Mm-hmm. But maybe not. I think it depends too on just like the arrangement or how you all came together. What's really nice to see is, like, I know on like Kelly Sue's Bitch Planet, like she and her artist, who I'm blanking on the name of his name, but she considers them both equal partners and equal collaborators, which I think is fantastic, because a lot of places try to separate like writer and artist when honestly, like, the comic is only the comic because it's the combination of them. Mm-hmm. And the letterer and the colorist and all of that. It's not, you can't just remove one aspect and it won't stay the same.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Well, like I said, I mean, Assassin Roommate, so it updates weekly, and then I just restarted Bonnie and Clyde, which I hadn't for a few years. That one also is just like pure joy for me to work on. It's really easy and it's really fun. So beyond that,
that's the one that I come back to the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope it's just like a fun, easy read, especially for people right now. Like, hopefully it's like a fun escape. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like it because I like Derby, and I just like your art and other stuff. So that's awesome. Well, I think that is all of my questions. So thank you for being a part of our Free Comic Day, and I'm going to stop the recording. So thank you. And again, Monica Gallagher,